There are books you study because a teacher told you to, and then there are books that hit you with a truth so sharp that you cannot unhear it. The Prince belongs in the second category. It feels less like a political treatise and more like someone pulling back a curtain on the part of power no one likes to admit exists. Machiavelli was not trying to impress anyone with flowery ideas about virtue or noble intentions. He was trying to explain how leaders actually rise, survive, and fall in the real world. When people read it today, they are often surprised by how familiar it feels. The strategies described in a 16th century manuscript echo through business meetings, election campaigns, boardrooms, international negotiations, and even personal relationships. The hook that keeps readers glued to the pages is simple. Machiavelli talks about the world as it is, not as it should be. This honesty is what makes the book magnetic. Anyone who has ever been betrayed, outmaneuvered, overlooked, or blindsided by someone more strategic than they were, can feel the truth in his words. He explains why powerful people often act in ways that seem cruel or immoral. To him, the goal of leadership is survival and stability, and if moral behavior fits that goal, good. If not, the leader must choose results over reputation. Whether people agree with Machiavelli or not, his clarity forces readers to confront uncomfortable realities that shape human behavior at every level of society. For a video audience, this is where the intrigue begins. The Prince is not a relic from a distant past. It is a blueprint for ambition. It is the manual behind every story of limited power turning into unstoppable authority. Understanding it does not require a background in Renaissance politics. It only requires a willingness to see how influence works behind the scenes. When viewers realize that Machiavelli's advice applies not only to kings and conquerors, but to anyone who deals with competition, conflict, or responsibility, they lean in. They keep watching because they feel the relevance instantly. And they walk away with a new lens for understanding every power struggle they encounter. 1. The world Machiavelli lived in. To understand why the Prince feels raw and urgent, you first have to understand the world that shaped its author. Machiavelli lived in Florence during a period that was unstable, violent, and full of rival powers fighting for control. Italy was not a unified country. It was a collection of city-states that competed for influence, while larger kingdoms like France and Spain used the region as a battleground for their own ambitions. Alliances shifted quickly. Armies moved constantly. Leaders rose fast and fell even faster. Political security in this environment was fragile, which forced rulers to rely on strategies that were flexible, ruthless, and sometimes deceptive. Florence itself was a center of art, money, and intellectual energy. But it was also a place where power changed hands through force, betrayal, and public favor. Machiavelli served as a diplomat and official in the Florentine Republic, which gave him a front-row seat to political chaos. He negotiated with kings, observed military campaigns, and watched leaders crumble under pressure. These experiences shaped his understanding of leadership far more deeply than theory or philosophy ever could. He saw what happened when leaders trusted the wrong allies or depended too heavily on luck. He saw what happened when good intentions met harsh reality. This world taught Machiavelli a lesson that ran through every chapter of The Prince. Stability requires strength, awareness, and strategic timing. It taught him that kindness without control is dangerous, that idealism without strategy is weak, and that leaders who fail to prepare for human ambition are eventually destroyed by it. When you read The Prince with this background in mind, you realize that Machiavelli was not encouraging cruelty for its own sake. He was describing a world where hesitation could lead to invasion or execution. His realism came from witnessing the cost of unsteady leadership. It was survival knowledge, collected from a lifetime of watching power in motion. 2. Why Machiavelli wrote The Prince. Machiavelli did not write The Prince from a position of strength. He wrote it after he lost his political career, his status, and nearly his freedom. When the Medici family returned to power in Florence, Machiavelli was accused of conspiring against them. He was imprisoned, tortured, and eventually released into a quiet life outside the city. For a man who had spent years in the center of political strategy, this isolation was crushing. Many historians believe that The Prince was written in an attempt to return to public service by offering the Medici a book that proved his value and insight. This context gives the book a different emotional weight. It was not created by a cold thinker who enjoyed the mechanics of manipulation. It was written by someone who had learned the cost of losing influence and wanted to understand how leaders could avoid the same fate. He studied every example he could find, from ancient rulers to newly risen princes who held on to power through calculated decisions. He analyzed what worked and what failed. He turned these observations into clear rules that a leader could follow to handle threats, build loyalty, and project strength. Machiavelli may have hoped the Medici would reward him for the work, but there is another layer to his motivation. He wanted to capture the truth about power in a way that had never been done before. Philosophers had written about virtue and justice, but few had written about strategy, fear, propaganda, and the psychology of leadership. Machiavelli saw a gap in political writing and filled it with honesty that shocked his era. His goal was practical education. He wanted leaders to understand that good intentions were not enough. Strategy shaped outcomes. Perception shaped loyalty. Preparation shaped survival. The Prince was his attempt to make these rules clear, even if they challenged the moral comfort of his readers. 3. The core idea of The Prince. The foundation of The Prince is simple. Machiavelli believed that a leader's success depends on their ability to understand human nature, not the idealized version that philosophers love to describe, but the version people encounter in the real world. He argued that people are driven by fear, self-interest, opportunity, and the desire for stability. When times are smooth, followers may appear loyal and grateful. When danger rises or a better option appears, that loyalty can evaporate. Machiavelli insisted that leaders must expect this shift and prepare for it. If they rely on the goodwill of others, they set themselves up for disappointment and defeat. He saw power as a living thing that has to be protected, shaped, and directed at all times. To Machiavelli, being moral is good, but only if it does not interfere with the survival of the state. A leader who tries to govern with pure kindness risks being outmaneuvered by someone who understands strategy better. This belief often makes Machiavelli seem harsh, but his real message is about awareness. Leaders have to see the world clearly, even when the truth hurts. They cannot close their eyes to ambition, betrayal, or the influence of fear. They must judge people by their actions rather than their promises. The power of this idea is still visible today. Politicians lose elections when they mistake popularity for real support. CEOs are removed when they assume employees or partners will stay loyal without incentives. Even in personal settings, someone who ignores the realities of human behavior can be blindsided by conflict. Machiavelli's writing forces leaders of all types to accept an uncomfortable truth. Power does not rest on virtue alone. It rests on understanding how people think, how they respond to pressure, and how easily their loyalty can shift. Recognizing this does not make a leader cruel, it makes them prepared. 4. Virtue and fortune. Two of Machiavelli's most important ideas are the concepts of virtue and fortune. Virtue is often misunderstood today. It does not mean personal moral virtue. It refers to a leader's ability to shape events through skill, willpower, courage, decisiveness, and strategic intelligence. A ruler with strong virtue can adapt quickly, take bold action when needed, and turn challenges into opportunities. Machiavelli believed that virtue separates forgettable leaders from legends. It is the force that lets someone carve their path instead of waiting for luck to guide them. Fortune, on the other hand, represents the unpredictable forces that shape life. It includes luck, timing, unexpected events, natural disasters, the rise and fall of rivals, and all the elements of life no leader can fully control. Machiavelli compared fortune to a river that floods without warning. A weak leader hopes the flood does not come. A strong leader builds barriers ahead of time. For Machiavelli, fortune favors the bold. Not because bold leaders can control everything, but because they prepare for the unpredictable instead of praying it never arrives. The relationship between virtue and fortune forms one of the most practical lessons in The Prince. Machiavelli argued that leaders succeed when their personal strengths match the demands of the moment. A cautious leader may thrive during stable times, but fail when the world becomes turbulent. A risk-taker may rise quickly during chaos but collapse when careful planning is required. The smartest leaders learn how to adapt. They do not change their character completely, but they adjust their behavior to fit reality. This flexibility, supported by courage and discipline, is how virtue can tame fortune. Even today, leaders who understand this balance are the ones who thrive in unpredictable environments. 5. Fear versus love. One of the most famous questions in The Prince is whether it is better for a ruler to be loved or feared. Machiavelli answered that it is ideal to be both, but if a leader can only choose one, fear is the safer option. He was not promoting cruelty for the sake of cruelty. He was focusing on predictability. Love is emotional and can fade when circumstances change. Fear, when managed correctly, is more stable. It creates a clear sense of consequence. It makes loyalty more reliable because people hesitate to betray someone who can punish disloyalty effectively. Machiavelli warned against confusing fear with hatred. A leader who becomes hated loses stability, because hatred fuels rebellion and resentment. Proper fear is controlled, measured, and rooted in respect. It means followers understand the leader's authority and take it seriously. It does not mean the leader treats people with brutality or injustice. Machiavelli argued that cruelty should be used rarely, quickly, and only when it prevents greater chaos. Excessive punishment weakens a ruler rather than strengthening them. It makes people desperate, and desperation is dangerous. What makes this idea powerful is how it applies far beyond Renaissance politics. In modern workplaces, for example, leaders who only seek to be liked often lose control because they avoid hard decisions. Leaders who rely on intimidation lose trust and burn out their teams. The most successful leaders combine respect with firmness. They build systems that reward loyalty and discourage betrayal without resorting to constant threats. Machiavelli's insight is less about fear itself and more about balance. He reminds leaders that stability requires authority and boundaries, not just charm. When leaders understand this balance, their decisions become clearer and their leadership stronger. 6. The role of military power. Machiavelli believed that no leader can remain in power without a strong military foundation. To him, armies were not just tools of war. They were the backbone of political stability. A ruler who depended on foreign soldiers or mercenaries risked collapse because those forces had no real loyalty. They fought for money or convenience, not for the survival of the state. Machiavelli had seen this firsthand during his diplomatic career. He watched mercenary armies abandon battles, switch sides, or demand higher pay at critical moments. This instability convinced him that a ruler must rely on troops who have a direct stake in the success of their leader. He argued that a strong military force must be backed by strong leadership. Training, discipline, and unity matter far more than sheer numbers. Soldiers who respect their leader fight harder, hold the line longer, and stand firm even when conditions turn against them. Machiavelli believed that a leader must understand military matters personally. They do not have to be the strongest warrior, but they must know strategy, logistics, and timing. Leaders who ignore the military create a vacuum that ambitious generals or rival states can easily exploit. The moment a ruler appears weak in matters of defense, enemies begin to circle. This principle extends beyond warfare. In modern terms, the army can represent the systems that protect an organization, skilled teams, reliable infrastructure, and loyal supporters who share the leader's goals. A CEO who does not invest in strong internal teams becomes vulnerable to competitors. A politician who ignores their core supporters risks losing elections. A community leader who has no trusted inner circle cannot enforce decisions or maintain influence. Machiavelli's message is simple and timeless. Strength supports authority. Preparation prevents disaster. Security cannot be outsourced to people who do not share your interests. 7. Appearances and reputation. One of the most important themes in The Prince is the power of appearances. Machiavelli understood that perception shapes reality, especially in politics. He explained that people judge leaders by what they see, not by what is happening behind the scenes. A ruler may be intelligent, fair, and strategic, but if they appear weak, uncertain, or inconsistent, followers will lose confidence. Machiavelli emphasized that leaders must present themselves as decisive, stable, and capable, even during moments of internal doubt. To him, reputation was a tool as powerful as any army. He believed that leaders should appear virtuous, even if they sometimes act in ways that contradict those virtues. This is not hypocrisy for its own sake. It is a recognition that public trust depends on symbols, stories, and impressions. People are more likely to follow someone they believe is guided by principles, even if that belief is built on image rather than pure reality. Machiavelli did not celebrate deception. He acknowledged that human beings crave visible qualities like generosity, fairness, and courage. Leaders who ignore this need risk alienating their supporters, even if they are making rational decisions behind closed doors. We see this dynamic everywhere today. Public figures carefully manage their online image. Politicians shape narratives around their values. Companies spend millions on branding to cultivate trust, even when their internal operations are complex and imperfect. Machiavelli predicted this psychology centuries before social media or public relations existed. He understood that influence depends on how people feel about a leader, not just what a leader accomplishes. Reputation, once damaged, is hard to repair. For this reason, he urged leaders to guard their image fiercely, because perception can stabilize power or destroy it. 8. Cruelty, kindness, and necessity. Machiavelli did not shy away from discussing cruelty, but his ideas are often misunderstood. He believed that if cruelty is ever used, it should be used swiftly and decisively. Prolonged or repeated cruelty breeds resentment and fuels rebellion. A quick, controlled action can prevent chaos and restore stability, which may ultimately reduce suffering. This viewpoint shocks many readers, yet Machiavelli's argument is pragmatic rather than sadistic. He cared about outcomes, especially the safety of the state. In his mind, hesitation or half measures often led to prolonged conflict, which caused far more pain than a single determined act. When it comes to kindness, Machiavelli warned that excessive generosity can backfire. A ruler who gives too much risks draining resources and encouraging entitlement. When generosity inevitably decreases, the same followers who once benefited may turn resentful. Machiavelli argued that kindness is powerful when applied strategically, but it cannot replace discipline. A leader must be firm enough to maintain order, even if it means disappointing people. Kindness without strength becomes a weakness that enemies quickly exploit. The real message in this section of The Prince is about balance and timing. Cruelty should be rare, justified, and purposeful. Kindness should be genuine but controlled. A leader who uses both tools wisely protects the stability of their state and earns long-term respect. Leaders in modern settings face similar challenges. Managers must sometimes enforce rules employees dislike. Parents must set boundaries for their children. Public officials must make decisions that upset certain groups. Machiavelli's insight is that leadership always involves difficult choices, and the ability to make those choices with clarity is what separates strong leaders from overwhelmed ones. The dangers of flattery and bad advice. Machiavelli understood that one of the greatest threats to a ruler does not always come from enemies. It often comes from the people closest to them. He warned that advisors, courtiers, and associates will often tell leaders exactly what they want to hear. They offer praise, agreement, and encouragement, not because they believe it, but because staying in the ruler's good graces protects their own position. This creates a dangerous bubble where the leader becomes blind to reality. Once trapped inside this bubble, a ruler stops seeing threats, ignores changing conditions, and assumes everyone is loyal. That is the moment when disaster begins to grow in silence. He believed that the best leaders actively protect themselves from flattery by creating systems where honesty is rewarded. This does not mean allowing chaos or letting people speak without structure. Instead, Machiavelli trusted leaders who choose advisors for their competence rather than their charm. These advisors must be trained to speak truthfully and clearly, especially when the leader is about to make a mistake. Machiavelli insisted that a leader should ask for advice when needed and then make decisions independently. Leaders who let others think for them lose control. Leaders who refuse all advice lose perspective. Stability requires a balance between listening and leading. This advice remains just as relevant today. Modern executives often surround themselves with loyal insiders instead of strategic thinkers. Politicians fill their teams with people who reinforce their narrative. Influencers listen only to those who maintain their image. In every case, the same danger appears. When a leader hears only praise, their judgment weakens. Machiavelli's warning is a reminder that truth is not always comfortable, but it is always useful. The strongest leaders create an environment where honesty is expected, and where good advice can reach them before a crisis does. How to hold newly acquired power. Machiavelli paid close attention to rulers who gained new territories or inherited unstable regions. He believed this was the most fragile moment in a leader's career. Newly acquired power attracts rebellion, manipulation, and resentment. People resist change, and rivals take advantage of this resistance. Machiavelli argued that a new ruler must act quickly to secure authority. They must remove major threats early, stabilize the region with firm decisions, and show that leadership will not hesitate when order is at risk. A slow or uncertain ruler invites challenges from every side. One of his most interesting strategies involves understanding local customs and political structures. A wise leader studies the culture of the people they govern. If the new territory has long-standing traditions, the ruler should respect them. If the region has been mismanaged, the leader should introduce reforms carefully, avoiding sudden changes that inspire panic or hatred. Machiavelli believed that people accept new rulers more easily when the ruler appears familiar, consistent, and sensitive to their experience. Ruthlessness may be necessary at times, but long-term stability requires cultural intelligence. Another key principle is establishing residency. Machiavelli wrote that rulers should spend time inside the territories they control. Living among the people shows commitment, encourages loyalty, and helps the ruler respond quickly to local issues. Modern leaders can learn from this too. Whether it is a CEO integrating a new team after a merger, or a politician representing a new district, physical presence builds trust. Power is strongest when it is visible and engaged. Machiavelli understood that distance breeds disconnect, and disconnect breeds rebellion. Staying close keeps control strong and challenges manageable. Economics, taxes, and public support. Machiavelli knew that political power does not survive without economic stability. A leader who pushes heavy taxes or drains the financial strength of their people creates resentment that eventually turns into open resistance. He argued that rulers must avoid taking property or wealth from citizens unless absolutely necessary, because people will forgive the loss of a loved one before they forgive the loss of their fortune. This insight reveals how deeply Machiavelli understood human psychology. Wealth represents security, opportunity, and dignity. When a leader disrupts that, anger spreads fast. He believed that strong economic policy builds trust. A ruler should invest in systems that improve productivity, protect trade routes, and support essential workers. When people feel their livelihood is safe, they become more loyal and less vulnerable to rebellious influences. Machiavelli warned that a leader who ignores economic pressures will create suffering that no amount, charisma, or force can repair. Stability comes from understanding how everyday people live, what they fear, and what they need. Modern leadership reflects this clearly. Governments fall when economies collapse. Corporations fail when workers lose confidence in management. Communities fracture when financial pressure becomes unbearable. Machiavelli showed that public support is not earned with speeches alone. It is earned with policies that keep people comfortable and hopeful. Economic strength gives a leader room to maneuver. It provides legitimacy, reduces outrage, and creates long-term loyalty. In every era, including ours, power grows stronger when people feel secure. Conclusion: Machiavelli's Prince endures because it strips away illusions about leadership and forces us to face the truth about how power really works. He studied human behavior with the precision of someone who had seen both victory and ruin, and he refused to soften his message to make it more comfortable. His insights about fear, loyalty, reputation, and strategy are not locked in the past. They continue to shape how people lead, negotiate, compete, and survive in every arena of life. Whether we agree with him or not, we cannot ignore the accuracy behind his observations. He exposed the mechanics of influence in a way no one had done before, and that honesty changed political thought forever. What makes The Prince so influential is the way it blends realism with responsibility. Machiavelli did not tell leaders to be cruel for pleasure or ruthless without cause. He told them to understand the weight of their decisions and the consequences of weakness. Leadership, in his view, demanded courage, awareness, discipline, and adaptability. Those who lacked these qualities were doomed to be pushed aside by someone who possessed them. His lessons remind modern viewers that power is not an accident, and stability is not automatic. It takes skill to build, focus to maintain, and constant attention to keep from slipping away. Even today, people return to the Prince not because they want to become tyrants, but because they want to understand how the world behaves beneath the surface. They want to know why certain people rise while others fall. They want to understand why charisma fails without strength, why kindness collapses without boundaries, and why leaders must balance ideals with reality. Machiavelli captured the rules of survival that still drive politics, business, and human relationships. That is why the book continues to shape conversations about power long after the world that produced it has disappeared. And that is why its lessons, when understood clearly, still hold the ability to change how we think, act, and lead.